Listen, the reality is 95% of the world's population is outside these borders, right? We need them as markets, as trading partners.
An American hog farmer is worried, and he is not the only one. He's not the only farmer worried about the U.S. trade war with China. The Trump administration has announced, again, more tariffs on an additional $200 billion of Chinese goods. And China is threatening to hit back with tariffs on their additional $60 billion on American goods. Hello, welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. In spring of this year, U.S. President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on Chinese goods, and China, not sitting back, retaliated, doing the same to U.S. products. Now, the Chinese tariffs directed at American farm products, that prompted an urgent $12 billion compensation package from the Trump administration to help those American farmers who suddenly found themselves caught in the middle of these two nations' trade war. President Trump recently tweeted, "They, meaning the Chinese, are under pressure to make a deal with us." But the Washington Post says this trade war could last far longer than the president thinks or tweets. Tariffs threaten to permanently cut off an important product export market for the U.S., farm products. Meanwhile, American farmers are already hurting. They are in their fifth year of declining income. So these new Chinese tariffs on American farm products could make things worse. VOA's Kane Faribault talked to two farmers in the Midwest who are worried about how all this will end.
As Brian Duncan prepares for a summer harvest of the picturesque amber waves of grain growing on his Polo, Illinois farm, his current situation is far from the American dream.
We're in trouble. It's dry.
Wheat is just one product that grows on Duncan's farm, which also produces 70,000 hogs each year.
Hogs were projected to be profitable this year.
Were, but not anymore.
Once that tariff went on, the pork stopped going into China, not going to Taiwan either, not finding other routes. It just, that market disappeared. Economists at leading universities have now taken us from a $4 to $5 a head profit to a $7 to $8 a head loss just based on China and some of these periphery issues that's dampened demand. Listen, the reality is 95% of the world's population is outside these borders, right? We need them as markets, as trading partners.
As the trade dispute continues, Duncan, who also serves as vice president of the Illinois Farm Bureau, is losing money on virtually everything growing on his farm due to imposed or impending tariffs. What he's left with is mounting frustration. The rolling and robust fields of soybean growing on Fred Greeter's Illinois farm would be a welcome sign most years, indicating a promising harvest in the fall. Tariffs are turning away potential customers overseas, and Greeter estimates he could lose around $100 an acre if the trade war continues.
It's a squeeze.
A squeeze acknowledged by the Trump administration, prompting the U.S. Department of Agriculture to plan a $12 billion aid package to help farmers like Greeter.
If you take the $12 billion, which assuming it'll all go to beans, which it won't, and divide that by our planted acreage, that's about $14 an acre.
And you're looking at a $100 loss an acre.
That's correct.
So you're still out $86.
That's correct.
It's not that Greeter isn't grateful. He'd just rather have trade over aid.
Joining me, United States Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, and also a lifelong farmer, the only farmer in the U.S. Senate. He joins us from Capitol Hill. Welcome to you, sir.
Glad to be with you, Greta. Thank you very much.
Senator, you have the unique position of being both a U.S. Senator and a farmer. How long have you been a farmer?
Since 1959.
What kind of farm do you have?
60% corn, 40% soybeans, and then my son and grandson are involved in the farming operation, and they have livestock, but I have no interest in the livestock.
What's the impact of the Chinese tariffs on farmers generally in Iowa, your home state, as well as on your family farm?
Yeah, it'd be the same for my family farm as what I'm hearing from Iowans. The impact just adds to the already low prices we had before there was anything there, and then lower prices because probably a good crop of soybeans and corn coming out, that the quantity is going to drive down the price further. And so it's hard to measure which one comes from tariffs and which one comes from just the oversupply that we have. But there's a great deal of anxiety of the farmers of my state, but I haven't heard any of them say that they disagree with the goals that President Trump's trying to accomplish, because if he's successful, and I know that's a big if, but if he's successful, it will be a better market for everything in the United States, whether it's manufacturing, agricultural products, or services. And the bottom line of it is that right now people have some anxiety. They hope the president's successful, and if they know he's successful, we'll have a better markets for our products. Not just because tariffs are going off, but there's non-tariff trade barriers that China puts on, and somebody mentioned Taiwan there. They've had some non-tariff trade barriers on our products. If we can get free trade, not only level playing field as far as tariffs are concerned, but also on the non-tariff trade barriers and where they're stealing our intellectual property, and particularly in agricultural intellectual property with new seeds and new varieties and the GMOs that we use are very helpful. That would help a lot if he can be successful at that.
Do you worry, though, that China, which is now looking to other markets like Brazil, will find that Brazil will be a better source in the future? So even if this trade war between these two nations ends soon, that the market for the American soybean will be diminished significantly?
Long term, no, if we're successful. Short term, there's already been an impact. China's doing exactly what you said. They also bought a heck of a lot of American soybeans way ahead of time because they anticipated there might be some tariffs. Where we're headed is, from the standpoint of China, what the president's doing is already making some impact. I had a discussion with Bob Lighthizer, our negotiator for this administration with all these countries. He said that the Chinese are sending a lower level delegation over here this week, maybe today and tomorrow, to start negotiations where the vice premier will come over. So we must be making some impact on China, or they wouldn't be making these outreaches to us.
All right. The president has authorized a $12 billion aid package to farmers, and I'm all for helping out the farmers. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from farm country myself, so I'm in favor. But that's obviously going to come out of the taxpayer pocket to do it. That's for two questions. One, is $12 billion enough to sort of to help the farmers in the short run? And then number two, what if this goes on beyond another year? It's going to keep growing in terms of that $12 billion.
Yeah, there's no certainty it'll go on beyond this first year. And that's kind of going to depend upon how successful the president is on these negotiations. But remember, he's already made a lot of success with Mexico, getting close to making one with Canada. The threats between the United States and Europe have slowed down. We're negotiating with Europe lower tariffs. If we get Europe and North America on the same page, we will have more force with our negotiations with China. So the president is making some progress, but in regard to your question, it makes up a little help right now, but it isn't. There's nothing that's going to do more good for farmers than markets. When we would bring this up with the president, at least 3 or 4 meetings I've had at the White House on trade with the president, he always brings up, well, he can help farmers in other ways, like with ethanol and with this package that you're talking about. But we all, including the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, was there with us. All of us said we want markets, we don't want aid. But then the president comes back and he says, well, we've had a trade war for 3 years and we lost. And now it's about time that we start talking turkey with these people.
And we'll have to see where this goes. Senator, nice to talk to you, sir, and good luck with your farm.
Thank you very much.
Kane Faribault covers Middle America for Voice of America. He joins us today from Cologne, Germany, where he's on assignment. Nice to see you. And tell me, what is your impression of the impact of these sanctions on American farmers?
Well, the senator's absolutely right in his statements there. You know, a lot of these farmers, you know, they're frustrated, they're concerned, but more importantly, they feel that while they agree with the policy, they don't agree with the way in which it was executed. A lot of them are frustrated that this wasn't resolved, you know, through diplomatic means before imposing tariffs. And I think that the frustration is that perhaps maybe many of them feel as if they haven't been talked to or they haven't been listened to. And they all feel, while a lot of them supported Trump and they agree with the policy, they don't necessarily agree with those methods.
Kane, who can outweigh whom? I mean, China has other markets to go to. They've got Brazil, they've got Argentina. The U.S. can sell to other markets as well as to Europe. But at some point, I mean, who's got the better hand if this were a card game in terms of the weighting?
Well, you know, China's a state-run country. I mean, it would, you know, all of the analysis of this trade war is that China's the one that can actually withstand or at least be the holdout longer than the United States. But there is some silver lining in all of this, you know, because China's buying more soybeans from Brazil and Argentina. The price of grain products from those two countries have increased somewhat, which means that, you know, places like Europe are looking to U.S. soybeans, which are at a lower price than those Brazil and Argentina products, and they're able to actually increase the amount of grain products they're purchasing. So on July 25th, the European Union reached an agreement with the United States in which, you know, there was going to be some exchange you know, for not imposing tariffs on imported cars from Germany or from Europe. Europe would actually purchase more grain products. And so since July 25th, there's been a 280% increase in the amount of grain products Europe has purchased. And that's not because there's been any sort of specific agreement which increased quotas. It's simply because the price is more competitive to buy it from the United States.
All right, before we even had this trade war with China and the United States, is that farmers had been suffering. The prices had been declining. Was that just an abundance of supply was driving the price down? Or why were soybean farmers, for instance, beginning to feel a pinch from the economy?
So right now there is an abundance. You know, farmers are looking at having a really good harvest. Right now, you know, they're in the fields, they're harvesting corn, they're harvesting soybeans. It's been a great year for growing these grain products. And with what looked to be, at least, you know, as far as farmers can forecast, a good crop this year, with these tariffs with China, there was a lack of access to a very important market. I mean, a lot of U.S. soybeans go to China. So prices for farmers are fluctuating daily, even though China did purchase a large amount of these products before these tariffs went into place. It's the long-term outlook, you know, the uncertainty of having China and the United States as two reliable trading partners that the farmers are fretting over. And that's really what's causing the uncertainty and the fluctuation in prices. And I think the senator touched on this too, but, you know, to add this point as well, it's not necessarily what's happening here in the short term. You know, the real long-term implications are if China starts purchasing more grain products from Brazil and Argentina or finds other markets where they can get this product, and they have a reliable trading agreement with those countries, it marginalizes the U.S. product. It means that there's no longer this reliable stream of trade of this product between these two countries. And so farmers are worried, not necessarily about this year, they're worried about the long term. They want to know that they can, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that they can sell those grain products to China.
And it's interesting to note some statistics I've pulled out that $20 billion in U.S. agriculture exports went to China last year, $20 billion. And in 2017, 33 million tons of soybeans were sold to China. And then, of course, 1/3 of Iowa's soybeans, where the senator is from, 1/3 of their entire soybeans also go to China. So it's a significant amount. Kane, thank you. And U.S. farmers are already beginning to feel the impact of those tariffs that have been imposed by China. I spoke with Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue about what he says are China's unfair trade practices that triggered this trade war. Going back to March of this year, the president imposed tariffs on China for unfair trade. And China retaliated about a month later and imposed tariffs that included a 25% tariff on soybean farmers. Right. What's been the impact of that?
Well, it's been very unfair and unjust from our perspective. We believe that the president justly called out China for some unfair practices that have gone on for a number of years, specifically the theft of intellectual property. Even in agriculture, they had been found and convicted of digging up corn seed in Iowa and Chinese nationals and taking them back, trying to reverse engineer. That's really stealing great research, millions of dollars of technology that way. And yet the president called China out on it and said, you got to stop. Rather than stopping those practices, they retaliated, which we believe with very unfair tariffs on our agricultural producers.
All right. I'm from the Midwest part of the country, and so a lot of farmers where I grew up.
Right.
How are they feeling the pinch in terms of the tariff, the Chinese tariff on their soybeans?
Economically, they're hurting, but if you know farmers, they're great patriots. First of all, they're optimists, they're resilient, they take a lot of licks and keep on getting up and putting those seeds in the ground every spring. But they understand what the president's trying to do, level the field where they can compete on a fair level playing field internationally.
Is there some sort of compensation or some federal program to help the farmers who are here feeling the pinch from these tariffs?
Early on, the president knew that farmers would be retaliated against if there was retaliation action taken. That's because our farmers are so productive. They depend on exports for about 20% of their sales and income. So he knew that, and he committed to them, knowing that the pain would be hopefully temporary till we can get these trade disruptions resolved. He committed to a mitigation program and asked us to design that. We did, and interestingly, just got deployed this past Tuesday.
And at the price tag on it's $12 billion. That's
Correct.
a ceiling amount that
That's right.
you know. Well, somebody's got to pay for that. So the farmers are getting the compensation. I'm all for the farmers, but the taxpayers have to pay the $12 billion, and this all results from the trade war.
That is correct. It's part of the federal treasury. It's part of the authorization in the Department of Agriculture called the Commodity Credit Corporation, and that's where the funds are coming from.
So how long will this last? The $12 billion is for the growing season beginning when?
For 2018 primarily, in the beginning and when the tariffs began in the spring and summer of 2018 for this crop only. We hope that we can have all these trade disruptions resolved by this time next year.
Is there any indication that's going to happen for the American farmer?
Any indication
that that's going to be resolved so that we're not going back into another allocation of $12 billion because somebody's got to pay that $12 billion.
Well, I think, again, the market's having a way to equilibrate over a period of time, and they will. You'll see less soybeans planted next year because of lower prices, because of the tariffs. But, yeah, this is a one-year event, and we do think the Mexican NAFTA just got resolved. We think hopefully Canada will come along very, very quickly. And in almost in a domino-like fashion, conversations have begun again with the EU over some of their non-tariff issues. And we're having great conversations with Japan in trade and commerce. The South Korean chorus agreement had already been restored as well. So then we hope China will understand that we need to work together.
Well, will China actually come back, though, at that point? Because they're buying soybeans now from Brazil. And so isn't there a risk that they're going to find another market that they might find a better market or more appealing, even just for maybe not a better price, but to sort of punish the American farmer?
Well, that could be true. We hope that won't be true. We believe they like the quality of our American soybeans and the product that our American farmers give. We think they'll come back. Commodities typically trade on price. We have a great logistical advantage really in going into China than Brazil does. But obviously, and the fact is, Brazil can't produce enough soybeans for China. They're going to need some U.S. soybeans this year as well, but we hope they come back as we've grown that market. That's one of the fears, though. That's one of the anxieties that farmers have about losing market share.
Do you speak to your Chinese counterpart as Secretary of Agriculture there? I take it that they have a Secretary of Agriculture.
They do.
And have you spoken to him?
Yes, we have.
And how's the relationship?
Well, the relationship personally is very good. We try to convince them that many of the biotechnical features that we use here in the United States to help feed not only our population but the world are safe, they're healthy, they're sound sciences prove that. There's still some non-tariff barriers that China has as part of the overall trade disruptions that are keeping our products out of there, that they could use a lot more of our other grains and cereals and corn and wheat and other products like that.
VOA's Bill Ide is on assignment in Beijing, China, and joins me to give us the international perspective of the U.S.-China trade war. He joins us right now via Skype. Bill, tell me, both Senator Grassley very influential senator, farmer himself, and Secretary of Agriculture in the cabinet of President Trump both seem quite confident of two things. One is that this trade war will end soon and favorably to the United States. What's the view in China?
Well, the view in China has long been that it can stand its ground as long as it needs to, and that if this continues to escalate, that it has plenty of weapons or means in its arsenal to kind of fall back on. And one thing that we do hear quite often is that the domestic economy in China is so large that it can absorb any kind of shocks from the trade war and further escalation.
How much of this will, obviously they've gone to Brazil, and I imagine that if they go to Brazil, they're going to drive the price up. The soybean price will rise up. How much is China willing to do it from sort of a grudge standpoint rather than strictly a financial one?
Well, I guess we're going to have to see. I mean, how long this drags out. Obviously, China would always say that it can do as much as it wants. But, there's an interesting thing that's going on right now with grain reserves, and they're going through and doing inspections here in China soon. There's a lot of concern that there's some fraudulent reporting. And so while they may have deep pockets and the reserves to kind of weather this storm, there's also a lot of uncertainties there as well.
In terms of how the U.S. is accusing China of being unfair in trade, how does China respond to that? Does China say, yes, we've been unfair, or competitively we're better, or that's not true? How does China respond to that?
Yeah, China has completely denied these accusations. It admits that it has had problems and is still addressing issues like intellectual property rights. But for the forced technology transfer issue that was very prominent, of course, in the 301 report, China says that's not happening. And in fact, in June of this year, they made a pledge that this would not happen anymore. Now, some are saying that the United States should take this in as a sign of good faith and put some trust into China. But we've seen from the past, even with pledges like this, when problems arise, there's very little recourse that you have to resolve issues when they come up.
How is President Trump perceived? How is President Trump perceived generally? Because even before he became President Trump, and even before he was a candidate for president, he would oftentimes say in interviews that China was cheating in trade. So I'm curious how sort of the personality of President Trump plays into this.
Well, before he was elected and at the beginning of the term, I think there was a lot of admiration for him as a businessman. People thought that he was a good choice for the American public and for China, that there would be some benefits, and that if any issues came up, that they would be resolved very quickly because he's a businessman. He wants to negotiate and cut a deal. But as time has worn on and things have escalated even more, I think there more and more are doubting that. And maybe there's a growing sense of cynicism towards his approach to things. In fact, I was having a conversation with someone today who talked about how pretty much everything he does now they see as a transaction, and that really he doesn't want to play ball the way previous U.S. leaders have had in the past, that he won't follow typical norms of foreign policy and diplomacy and whatnot. And so they see him as kind of a step away from that, or a step away from the past, but they kind of embrace it as a reality that they have to deal with at the moment.
How does China choose the products that it imposes its tariffs on? Because, I realize that there are 33 million tons of soybeans last year were sold to China by the United States, so that's a likely candidate. But it does seem that, this affects Iowa, which is a very important political state for the midterms in 2020. Are they sort of cherry-picking certain products that they think will have the greatest political impact domestically here, or am I just reading something into this?
Well, when the first tranche of tariffs that came out, it was very clear that there was a political agenda there. And obviously, China is aiming to target sectors where the U.S. government government is going to feel a pinch or trying to exact as much pain. But I don't know, as we go further on, and of course President Trump has warned that if they're in this latest round or any other actions that follow by China clearly target farmers or certain industries, that he's going to impose even more tariffs. I think that as this moves on, they're going to be a little bit more cautious about how they approach the tariffs and which kind of tariffs they can select. But as we know, at this point, they've pretty much, there is a limit to what they can tariff at this point.
President Trump can use rather muscular talk and act very tough and say harsh, things about other countries. Is the public rhetoric coming from the Chinese government, is it equally as sort of robust and muscular towards the United States?
Well, it's always been that way. And the trade war, I guess, has kind of been a season where it's picked up a little bit more. But the typical accusations that we hear from Chinese state media about the U.S. government, about how it's trying to contain China, its hegemonic behavior, and it's the whole trade tussle that is going on right now has given them plenty of opportunities to kind of repeat and loudly kind of speak out these kinds of accusations. But I don't know if it's necessarily it's any worse than it was before.
It's sort of interesting is that countries can have battles over certain topics. Here it's obviously trade, but at the same time be working together on certain projects. For a while, it seemed that China was very much working with the United States to try to resolve the problem in the Korean Peninsula. Is that still the situation, that to get the sense that China and the United States are working together more as they have been, or is it something else?
Well, it's a really interesting dynamic that has been going on there with the trade tensions and the trade war and also the North Korean issue. And, we've seen some incredible steps today that were taken in the meeting between President Moon and Kim Jong-un. But at the same time, we've also had these revelations about how Russia and China were skirting sanctions. So it's very tenuous at this point. Hard to say.
And of course, all eyes are watching indeed the Korean Peninsula. And with all the trade that goes on between our two nations, the United States and China, and the fact that China holds the most of our debt, this couldn't be more fascinating and even more troublesome at the same time. Bill, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America. And you can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And do follow me on Twitter @Greta. Thanks for being plugged in.